This is the Code to Cash podcast.
Hello and welcome to the new episode of Code to Cash. I'm your host Ajit, and today we have Vatsala Mishra, who is the Senior Director of Global Deal Desk at LinkedIn. Vatsala, thank you so much for taking time to speak with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Ajit. Appreciate it.
Such a huge company like LinkedIn, and we've been doing this series on Deal Desk, but I'm so excited to have this conversation specifically with you because large organizations, I don't even know how deal operations, deal desk teams are structured. Before that, I would love to go a little bit into your background. How did you end up doing this role? And maybe if you can help explain your background a little bit, and that will help also others who are interested in this field and want to grow into a role such as yours eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. So before LinkedIn, I have years of experience in management consulting across McKinsey, Kurt Salmon, IRI, a stint at Gap as well. And I'm pretty much a management consultant turned operator. So at LinkedIn, my journey has been mostly in code to cash. I was hired to drive excellence in LinkedIn's end-to-end code to cash process across all lines of business. And before this role, I was part of LinkedIn's BizOps leadership, where I partnered with our e-staff to think about like what does the roadmap look like from a people, process, systems perspective for code to cash. So thinking through large investments in our revenue systems and in our CPQ, CRM, etc. That used to be my role. And this role opened up with one of my cross-functional partners to lead LinkedIn's global deal desk team globally across for all LOBs, and I jumped at it just because the role for deal desk is evolving so quickly, and there's so much you can do in terms of it's from being a more transactional kind of a function to a more strategic partner to sales and driving deals and thinking through increasing the deal size and win rates, etc. So the function has evolved very quickly in how strategic it is.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about the strategic aspect, but which I will. I want to start with just a very basic question. If CROs are generally listening to this conversation, or maybe a CEO is, what is happening in a company at a point in which one should say, now I need a deal desk function, and how is that different from, oh, I have a person who's helping me finish my contracts, put the contracts and past the finish line.
Yeah, I think if a company, as they scale and the GTM motions become more and more complex, right? The complexity in your customer segments, the type of deals, your SKUs, your product, offers bundling, as the complexity increases, having a specialized team responsible for these managing and optimizing these complex sales deals becomes really important. And so what the way that we think about Deal Desk at LinkedIn is it's a team that drives end-to-end deal strategy and process and really providing that strategic guidance and partnership to sales for optimal deal structures, pricing options to meet customer needs, and also this driving this end-to-end cross-functional collaboration. So Deal Desk at LinkedIn is really a quarterback for all the pre-sales ecosystem, and with very clear objective of how to drive the deal forward with the right approvals, but also having the right guardrails in terms of company policies, sales policies, etc.
Right. As you sort of build a function like this, I'm curious about, one thing is clear that yes, you have to help close deals, you have to help deals cross the finish line, and you have to help create this whole structure. I'm curious about what is hidden behind the scenes, because if a seller knows like, hey, I need to close this deal, what is happening behind the scenes? Which other departments or which other cross-functional groups, what things do you have to square away such that the company is protected while a deal is being done efficiently as well?
Yeah. So as you think about setting up Deal Desk and how to think about the end-to-end company perspective, I think first thing is just define what you're solving for with this deal desk function, right? So common objectives can include accelerating deal cycles, improving win rates, increasing deal sizes, and also making sure there's compliance and consistency in sales policies, pricing, contract terms, right? So that is pretty important. The other is like understanding what is the scope of your deal desk team, right? So for instance, and it depends on the company size, like is there a certain threshold of deals that the deal desk will handle, right? A large strategic over a certain dollar threshold, right? Are there more complex deals, like straightforward renewals is not something that deal desk will touch, but like, where are more complexity, where there are kind of consolidating different contracts, bringing that together, tear ups, etc. That's something that deal desk will touch, or certain customer segments. So that is pretty important. That will help you kind of right size. And also creating like clear guidelines for pricing, discounts, contract terms, just to make sure that we are focused on profitability, consistency. I think also you asked about like what are some of the other departments? Like it takes a village, right? I mean, the key stakeholders typically in the pre-sales are like sales, of course, finance plays a big role, revenue, credit. Pricing team is huge. It partnership with like setting the pricing strategy and monetization options. Sales compensation on how sales will be compensated depending on what kind of deal it is, et cetera, et cetera. Other teams that can be involved are legal, info. Yeah, so typically these tax can also play a role. Plus the engineering and product teams who also help kind of like power the entire like end-to-end pre-sales and how the deal flows through the different systems. So kind of like thinking through, so yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, please. I'll let you finish.
So like thinking through like, a deal, like almost deal desk being the quarterback of working through a very complex ecosystem and having the skill sets to kind of like almost like, negotiate, work, having sales process knowledge, be able to collaborate cross-functionally, and also be well versed with analytics, like, deal size, pricing, discounting, etc. That is pretty key. And that's what goes behind the.
I'm a little curious about the sort of compliance, and the compliance is one, but I guess what factors contribute into the policies that you set up? So there is the pricing team giving you information, and then there are information coming from other teams. What other criteria allows for you to even create the first sort of operating system? Like, these are the rules we're going to follow. This is, and every deal list, I guess, will have some operating rules, but where are the considerations coming from for you to be able to say, okay, this is why X% discounted, this is why we want Y% margin, and so on?
So I think at a highest level, it needs to start with what your strategic priorities are, right? So which is said at pretty much like our CEO level in terms of like, what customer segments, what markets, what products, right? What are our financial objectives? Like that can depend on like, macroeconomic scenarios as well. Like, is retention a key focus area? Is growing, like the renewal incremental growth, like RIG is a key. And you will kind of like, have your GTM strategies and also your policies to kind of like, make sure that you're aligned that. So example, our sales policy, apart from pricing, our sales policy team plays a big role in terms of like what is allowed, what is not allowed, right? So things like, when can you actually, so our LinkedIn business is also, it's a subscription business, lots of renewals. So when can you allow, for instance, like, customers to, or sales reps to pull forward contracts from a different fiscal period to like forward, like, what are some of the sales policies that guard that in terms of customer growth, like customer need, etc. Right? When can you like, consolidate different contracts across different subsidiaries of a big, large parent company and bring them together? And what does it mean for LinkedIn versus the customer? So there are a lot of like, these sales policies that guide, and then pricing comes in terms of like, how do you, as you consolidate different contracts together, right? Now, what does that mean from like a pricing perspective? If you're bundling to get better pricing, like, do you need to reach a certain threshold to unlock some of incentives and pricing, etc. So there are a lot of like, guardrails to ensure that we are thinking about maximizing bookings and also profitability for the company.
Makes sense. In some other companies, when I do these interviews with other deal desk leaders, there is a sort of a push and pull with sales, where some sellers just want deal desk support on every deal, and like, here, tell me how to make this code, tell me how to make this contract. And then there is also the inverse problem of some sellers don't want to engage at all and don't bring in deal desk till the last moment, and something really bad has happened and they've been avoiding some rules. So what makes this happen? Like, how do you set it up properly so you are not flipping in either side? Or what do you think companies could do wrong, where either there is like this over dependence on the function or avoidance of the function altogether?
Yeah, I think a very clear kind of like, set of rules and guidelines on when to engage deal desk, which is aligned at the highest sales leadership level, is super important. So for instance, the way that we solve for it is we have very different support models for different customer segments. So for our biggest customers, we're talking about millions of dollars of deals, right? Those have almost a white glove support from deal desk, right? The ratios are very low, 1:3, like one sales rep has, super, very short SLAs and stuff like that, right? Whereas for more our kind of lower set of customers, like the most small and medium, we will have more longer SLAs, but also larger ratios, right? And we'll also get a lot of vendor support for that. There is also, and it also depends on complexity of deal, right? So for instance, if there are many subsidiaries involved, there are a lot of consolidations and stuff like that, complex transactions, we will more tenured people and helping through that. But then if it's a straightforward auto renewal or something like that, then we won't touch it. There'll be very little touching from deal desk. Some companies also solve it through a dollar threshold. Like bigger companies would put a $1 million, the deal size needs to be at least $1 million for deal desk to get involved with. And that's the support that we'll give you.
Right.
So it depends on different factors, but having that clarification with your sales leaders and following that rule book, I think is super important.
Good. And this, you don't actually have to answer the question, or you can anonymize this. But I'm curious about what does this complexity look like, right? Like, let's say there is actually a hands-on deal that someone in your team is supporting. Could you give some example of something really hairy? And again, I don't need to know any specifics, but in terms of how multiple variables that have to be accommodated to get something over the finish line. I'm just wanting you to just paint a picture of the level of complexity that can happen in actually supporting some complex deal across the finish line.
Yeah, absolutely. And given that LinkedIn is a global, multiple LOBs, and also the quarter end becomes really important, where you need to book that deal before that quarter for sales to kind of get the credit quota for that. So some comes that mind, like complexity, a multiple large customer with teams across the world, and last day of the quarter, our customer who's based in the US suddenly throws a curveball where they change the ship to entity of a global deal to their APAC headquarter, meaning that now the deal needs to be closed in LinkedIn APAC. It's the LinkedIn, America's deal team that has been driving, and suddenly it needs to last day of quarter, suddenly it has to be closed in APAC. So we quickly liaise with our APAC revenue, credit, billing, legal to get literally last minute weekend coverage to ensure that the deal is closed smoothly. So everything transfers from America to APAC, right? And then pretty much 31st December, or the last day, 5 p.m. the deal is closed, and we just are catching the APAC time.
This could even mean not only switching their entity, but also your corporate entity, so that a different entity it becomes the need to sell it.
It's recognized in APAC now, not in NAMA, right? So everything switches, and there's a lot of approvals and process changes that need to be done. But so that's but it's good for LinkedIn to book it in that quarter, because it's recognized that quarter, right? And
makes sense.
Points towards a plan, etc. So again, deal desk will play a big role that managing across time zones, driving stakeholder alignment, accountability, getting customer approvals, signatures, etc. So those are some of the kind of stuff that the other examples I can think of, customer makes last minute changes over in a customer order, and it's the last or the second last day of the quarter. And then we cannot take just verbal. So, verbal agreement with the customer, it has to be written. So how do we quickly drive alignment with revenue, legal, credit, data quality, etc. So you accept the new customer terms, and then getting written acknowledgement from the customer, making sure that everything is compliant and within our sales, within our policies, and doing that last minute. So these are some of the war stories that happen, especially towards the end of the quarter.
Makes sense. One thing I was curious about, and I get very sporadic, divergent answers on this, is about since you come from a consulting background, and I've gotten better answers from people who have consulting backgrounds, is about what sort of operational processes to set up to sort of really scale these teams. What I've noticed is younger companies who have somebody coming out of sales enablement or coming out of some other function, it becomes more responding or reacting, and there are no processes not that well defined. But I'm curious, how do you think about what processes? And I'll give you examples of my time as a pricing person. I used to have pricing committee meetings where everybody would discuss pricing.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing there are more things that you are running for aligning everybody. So I'm just curious, what are those type of things that somebody could consider in a company to make their processes work more smoothly?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, I was hired to do this like at LinkedIn about 6 years ago. So
Yeah.
one of the first things, similar to what you said about pricing committee, we had a quote to cash committee.
Mm.
And it had like a cross-functional partnership from like every like sales, finance, customer operations, some legal as needed, but also our R&D engineering, right? So these all these cross-functional partners were coming both at kind of the mid level, but also at the VP and like the really senior exec level to kind of make like long-term strategic decisions into what needs to done to drive that quote to cash excellence, right? So some of the things that came out of it, like was a new op model, like how can we just support like more sales with single point of contact? So like, it's deal desk quarterbacking everything pre-sales, right? How do we invest in our long-term systems to make sure things are more automated, right? And especially like, decisions to invest in like CPQ, CRM, those things become really important just so that like, we try and drive more and more automation. So reliance on manual work, which also is like highly error prone is reduced, right?
Yeah.
Thinking through like, how does how soon can like, how quickly can the GTM motions change and what does it need to like mobilize a big like pricing change, etc. Like what's the playbook for that? Like, what's the rapid in terms of decision making, etc. for that, right? Also kind of thinking through how to bringing some like, excellence from industry, right? Like, how have other companies thought through like, evolving GTM motions, excellence in QTC, like investments, etc. So I think that kind of like thinking through like, almost a committee who's or like a stairco that's thinking about it, is like, can really drive the needle in terms of like, excellence and quote to cash. So
When it comes to the sales teams themselves, right, they often have things like deal review meetings or like there is quarterly things. So I'm guessing like this quote to cash steering is happening more strategically, even at a longer time frame. But
yeah.
are you also doing things that are quarterly from like the sales team's context, or let's say the finance team's context to be aligned with them?
Yeah. So for that, like, so I agree. I mean, that's the one that's like, happening maybe once a quarter to kind of set the strategic direction. But on a regular level, you have these sales forecasting calls that are happening almost weekly, bi-weekly, right? And the whole cross-functional, pre-sales cross-functional team is kind of attending that. We are like live discussing large deals. Like, are there any risks? Do we need an executive engagement? What support do we need from deal desk? Are there any pricing offers we should consider, right?
Right.
Then there are these account planning meetings happening, right? To kind of like, which is like not just like, it's kind of leadership, but it's like for specific account, like XYZ account, like, what is the strategy for that? What do we need? Have the customer needs changed, etc. So again, deal desk is part of that, like just thinking through, especially for our bigger clients, right? Then there are like, almost like post-mortem meetings sometimes
Yeah.
happen. Like, the deal did not go through as we expect. Like
Yeah.
what went wrong and what are some of the learnings that we can bring from this size, the deal this size to other deals and like, or for the same client, like, the
Right.
future deals, etc. So yeah, it's a very well-honed operating rhythm that happens and and the way that you can solve for it is bringing a lot of discipline, right? In terms of like, just holding yourselves accountable for these like, regular forecast meetings, regular account planning meetings, and make sure that you have all the stakeholders part of that.
And when I was at Twilio or other companies, I used to do this in the pricing context, not in a deal desk context, but I would do a pricing performance analysis. This is what we did. This is how things worked. But discounting was also part, like this is how discounting worked. Now, something similar, but also that includes deal velocity. How long did things take to close? Is that something your team will create reporting on, or is that like some other team's job? Curious.
Yeah, it's something that actually we have a metric called deal cycle time, where
Okay.
we measure like end to end, like from the time the quote was provided, like when we have like a clear gauge of customer interest to the time deal closed and what was it. And we actually have a dashboard that looks at like, large deals and see where are some of the bottlenecks. And based on that, we've identified like, where, like what kind of case types, what kind of like, complex deals take the most time. And we are actively improving, like, investing in improving the process or also bringing automation there. Those become like, kind of like, for instance, some of our more enterprise programs, right? Which are kind of like, more like all you can eat kind of deals, right? Where they tend to have like much longer deal cycles, sometimes even 4x, just because there are so many approvals needed. There is a lot of like back and forth with the customer, other teams, etc. So we are actively thinking through how to invest in automation there, and also like, look at streamlining the end-to-end journey with deal desk support and pricing partnership to shorten those deal cycles. So yes, we will absolutely invest in process improvements, automation, changing policy policies, changing approval policies. So like, can you empower a team so that just the whole deal cycle becomes quicker?
Awesome. Yeah, this is why I asked you the question, because it's often I find with these folks who have consulting backgrounds, there is more sort of thought paid into that. But that brings to mind a question that if, let's say there's a CRO or a CFO who's wanting to hire their first deal desk leader and build out a function, what is the, I should not bias with the consulting thing, but I'm just curious, what type of person should they look to staff up a deal desk function, and how should they think about making that first hire?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think somebody who can think strategically, but also has that operational expertise and ability to kind of go deep into like thinking through where the challenges are, right? So if I think about like from an exec perspective, a CFO, CRO, right, what they would expect this deal desk leader to deliver would be like around the revenue optimization. Like for instance, like actively contribute to revenue growth by structuring deals that maximize deal size, margins, while remaining competitive in the market, right? So how does the deal desk leader partner with pricing on like incorporating smart pricing strategies, volume discounts, bundling options, right, etc. Making sure there is strategic, like this leader can think about strategic alignment. So can this deal desk leader can think about, hey, what are the sales GTM strategies, right? And how do I translate that into every deal that my team drives, right? For instance, like, should I focus more on enterprise programs, which are kind of like these more large complex deals, right? Rather than a la carte deals. Thinking about like, if there is focus on like specific region or like, or geographic location or a product segment, right? Customer segments, like for instance, it could be focused on a lot of acquisition rather, for a new customer acquisition, like how to think about that. And the deal desk leader is expected to understand and incorporate these strategic priorities. Ensuring the leader also is thinking about scaling the team cost effectively. So at some point, like, so the way we thought about it in Deal Desk at LinkedIn is like, we have like a mix of employees, but also vendors. So our vendors do a lot of transactional, like, more admin stuff where we get our FTEs to focus on real kind of deal strategy and, negotiation, and also like, strategically guiding sales on deal structures, right? So, and that can really help with like, kind of like keeping the overall cost of running a deal desk team, like, manageable, and it does not scale as
Awesome. Super awesome. Thank you so much for that. Those are all my questions. I'll ask the last question. Is there anything else on your mind that I should have asked, but I missed asking?
I think just like the role of deal desk is evolving, right? And just like, I know you're running the series. I would be curious to see other people's perspective on as well, and how they're thinking about the deal desk of the future, and kind of like, almost transitioning it from that more transaction order management to more strategic partners and like, quarterbacks driving the deal. But yeah, just curious, like I would love to see what other leaders come up with and learn from them.
Right. So in your opinion, how, I guess, yes, there has been a perception of it being just like responsive, and what we have discussed overall in the call has been fairly strategic. Have you spoken with other deal desk leaders around this topic? Have they been seeing a shift in expectations of the role, or is this, I'm curious about what you're hearing, that's all, on this transition.
Yeah, absolutely. Given that we are owned by Microsoft, I speak to Microsoft Deal Desk pretty often. And there is like, Microsoft has a Deal Desk Center of Excellence that is kind of thinking through like, when will Deal Desk engage? How can we like just provide more value? There are like specific desks that are being set up in terms of like, it's very specific, like, business objective. Like for instance, in a macroeconomic environment like this, like how do you save, like especially the large renewals that are coming? Like how do you like, provide that one-on-one coaching to sales so that they can handle all objections from customers, etc. Right? There are like, the role of deal desk is definitely evolving as kind of a more of a like a strategic partner with sales and making like, very clear, like, bookings and win rates, etc.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.